After enduring terrible treatment from my husband George and his mother Susan, I decided to divorce George after 30 years of marriage. I can't live with you any longer. I want a divorce. Then George moved quickly. He called Susan, who lived nearby, and apparently told her about my intention to divorce. Susan joyously barged into our house, and they both smirked as they berated me.
Isn't the move done yet?
Get out fast.
Normally, it's impossible to move out immediately upon deciding to divorce, but they knew that. They just wanted a reason to mock me. I'll be gone in 30 minutes. But I wasn't going to just sit back and take it. Thank you. I appreciate your help for the move today.
Please leave it to us. The rental car has also been arranged, so please come this way.
As I was about to get into the car, Susan followed me and looked surprised.
What? What's with this luxury car?
I was about to leave them behind for good. They can panic and regret it all they want. My name is Emily, and I'm 50 years old. I got married to my husband George in my 20s, and we were blessed with a son, Jacob. At that time, George asked me to quit my job to focus on housework and child rearing, so I resigned, though it was with regret. I raised Jacob with love, but during that time, George began to grow cold, casting a shadow over my life. Back then, I just endured their unreasonable treatment and tried to get through each day.
Hey, Emily, the entryway is dirty. You're a stay-at-home mom now, so at least take care of the house properly.
I'm sorry. I'll clean it right now.
Really? You can't do anything right. What good is a college degree if it's useless?
Since I became a housewife, Susan started coming over to our house every day. Each time, she would find something to complain about, raising her voice and blaming me. She had always been critical of the fact that I graduated from college.
Even though you graduated from college, you can't do anything.
But lately, these complaints have become even more frequent. However, she doesn't help, she just complains.
Once you're done here, could you clean in front of my house too? You really can't take a hint, can you?
Instead, she tries to burden me with the housework at her place too, since we live close by. She often catches me going shopping and imposes her own shopping on me. Of course, I don't get paid.
Oh my, Jacob, you're so cute.
When she comes over, all she does is sporadically dote on Jacob. And that's all she does. She doesn't take on anything challenging. She just shows affection, and everything else is thrown my way.
Hey, he's crying. Poor thing. Hurry up and calm him down.
Yes, I'll do it.
Really? It's terrible for a parent to make a child cry.
Even though Susan has experience raising kids and knows they cry, it seems any reason is good enough to berate me. George doesn't help around the house either, and as soon as I quit my job, the burden fell entirely on me.
Emily, do you have time sometime? There's a place to drop off the kids. Maybe we could go to a cafe?
I'm sorry. I've been told not to go out except for housework.
Really? If you ever have a tough time, let me know. I'm here to talk. Well, maybe another time.
This lifestyle keeps me from syncing up with friends, and I gradually drift apart as I keep declining invitations.
Hey, Jacob, what should I do? I feel like I'm being left behind by the world.
Despite Jacob being adorable, it was other reasons that were building up my stress.
Hey, haven't you taken out the trash yet? It's dirty. Hurry up and do it.
Yes, I will.
Oh my God, you're so slow. Why did I end up with such a daughter-in-law?
Juggling housework while caring for Jacob, I inevitably ended up doing both tasks half-heartedly, and both George and Susan criticized me for it. When Jacob turned 3, I considered enrolling him in daycare so I could focus on housework during the day, but Susan opposed the idea.
Daycare? You're pulling him away from his parents. Don't slack off on parenting just because you're a stay-at-home mom.
Even though she finds fault with both my housekeeping and parenting, how dare she say that?
Susan, who even dumps her own tasks on me, seems to dislike it whenever something might make my life a little easier. George was never interested in parenting to begin with.
Do whatever you want.
When he realized it wouldn't cost money, he just dismissed it and refused to join any further discussions. I decided to try to convince Susan.
I think it's good for Jacob to practice socializing since he's an only child.
Being firm because it was true seemed to work. I managed to convince Susan, at least for the moment. However, feeling outsmarted, Susan looked displeased and started to snipe at me.
If that's what you think is best, fine. But pushing Jacob out like he's a nuisance, I would never do that.
Seeing Jacob making friends and playing happily gave me some peace of mind. Yet my life was still under Susan's watchful eye.
Just because Jacob isn't here doesn't mean you can slack off on the housework.
Susan came over every day to check on me. If I hadn't finished the housework before she arrived, she would get angry even if I was in the middle of it, saying, "This isn't done," or "You haven't completed this." I couldn't help but fear and despise her.
Hey! Dinner!
How was your day? I'll serve it now.
I'm tired. Hurry up.
All right.
George now neither helps with housework nor childcare. Instead, he just adds to my burden.
Hey, you served the same menu last week. Are you slacking on the housework?
No, I cook every day, so some repetition is bound to happen.
Are you talking back to me? Who do you think provides for you?
George's yelling, just like Susan's, echoes in my head. Even Jacob, who was playing quietly, started crying from the shock.
Don't make him cry at mealtime. You're not disciplining Jacob properly.
Is that how he treats his child? I can't believe I married this man.
While holding back my frustration, I desperately tried to soothe Jacob.
When you suddenly yell like that, anyone would get startled. Please talk a bit softer.
Are you saying it's my fault? Don't get cocky just because you're a stay-at-home mom. Without my money, you guys wouldn't be able to eat. Show some gratitude and respect.
George always talks about money. Moreover, he separated his salary from the household account. He gives me some money for living expenses each month, but it's clearly getting less each year. Considering the expenses Susan forces on me, it's nowhere near enough. Even when I explain the situation and say we're short on money, George is very reluctant to contribute more.
It's your negligence. You spend too much. You think you can do whatever you want with someone else's money.
Yet, he won't tell Susan to stop sending me on errands.
If only that would stop, things might be a bit better.
You can't say no, and that's your fault.
That's all George insists on. And he keeps blaming me. Surely he doesn't want to be seen as the bad guy. And he hates that his earned money is used by anyone but himself. I have a bad relationship with my parents and nowhere to return to. Considering Jacob and the expenses that are piling up, I couldn't afford a divorce. Carrying the burden of stress, I convinced myself to maintain this marriage for Jacob's sake. Even as Jacob grew older, the harassment-like treatment towards me from them continued. Susan constantly watched over me, criticized my shopping and housework, and George often came home without notice. Yet, when he does come home, it's always suddenly, and he flies into a rage if dinner isn't ready right away.
How many years have you been a housewife, and you still can't manage the housework properly? Get it together.
At least let me know if you need dinner. You don't come home some days. I can't have it ready instantly.
Don't talk back. That's your job. Who do you think earns the money here? You're just eating off my earnings. The least you could do is manage that.
Lately, George's arguments have gotten even worse. Jacob, having grown up, observed Susan and George with a very cold eye due to the treatment he received from a young age. He was kind to me, but clearly avoided them and rarely engaged in conversations with them. One day, with a serious expression, Jacob told me something shocking.
Mom, George is cheating.
What? When Susan and George were not around, Jacob referred to them as Susan or George respectively. Initially, I gently scolded him, but I soon gave up, as I could no longer see George as a husband or even Jacob's father.
The other day, while I was hanging out with friends, I saw him walking with a young woman. So we followed them for a few days and got plenty of evidence.
Jacob showed me the photos saved on his smartphone. There were pictures of George walking arm in arm with a woman around 30 years old, entering a movie theater, and going into a restaurant. There were also photos of them entering a hotel, leaving a hotel, and even kissing on the street. Thanks for telling me, but don't do this again. It's dangerous. So I decided to gather evidence on my own. However, being constantly monitored by Susan, I couldn't freely act. I hired a detective and left it to a professional. I had no love left for George, and Jacob was already grown up. While preparing for a divorce, I decided to gather evidence of George's infidelity. George, we need to talk. I confronted him once I had gathered enough evidence. Then George lashed out at me in anger.
So it's all my fault now, is it? It served you right to be cheated on. Do you think I can see a shabby old hag like you as a woman?
As expected, George wouldn't admit his faults. And then he said his usual line.
Who do you think has been paying for everything all this time? Don't get all high and mighty. You have nowhere else to go anyway. Know your place.
Are you serious? I've been subjected to terrible treatment all this time. I thought I had no love left for him, and even felt hatred, but I was surprised to find there was still something deeper. It's not just hatred. A disgust wells up, and George yelling in front of me starts to look utterly repulsive.
Serious? Of course, I am. If I said I wanted a divorce, you'd be lost without me. Better keep in line and stay on my good side if you don't want to be divorced.
Hearing George's words, the last thread of my patience snapped. I can't live with you any longer. I want a divorce.
What did you say?
Initially surprised, George quickly regained his composure. With a spiteful smirk, he looked down on me.
Fine. Do as you like.
Then George moved quickly. He called Susan, who lived nearby, and apparently told her about my intention to divorce. Susan joyously barged into our house, and they both smirked as they berated me.
So you're finally getting a divorce, right? A wife like you who can't do anything right is just in the way. It'll be refreshing to have you gone.
If you end up on the streets, don't blame us. Once we're divorced, you and I are strangers. Don't count on my money. I'm sick of seeing your miserable face. Just get out.
I looked at them with cold eyes and then began packing my things. Since the day I learned of George's infidelity, I had been slowly gathering my belongings so I could leave immediately.
Don't even think about seeing Jacob again. He's our grandson. He'll inherit our house and take care of us in our old age.
You should just live alone and lonely.
They laughed with mean-spirited voices. Looking back, my life has always been looked down upon by them. What joy do they get from attacking someone like this? I guess I'll never understand.
Isn't the move done yet?
Get out fast.
Normally, it's impossible to move out immediately upon deciding to divorce, but they knew that. They just wanted a reason to mock me. But I wasn't just going to take it silently anymore. I'll be gone in 30 minutes. Having been pushed this far, I couldn't let it go without fighting back. I was determined to get my revenge, including for everything up until now. I only have a few personal belongings left in this house. If I ever had a bit more stuff, George and Susan would get furious, so in the end, this made my move out much smoother. Still, it was a lot to move by myself, so I asked for transport help. When I called, 2 vehicles quickly came. Thank you. I appreciate your help for the move today.
Please leave it to us. The rental car has also been arranged, so please come this way.
In addition to the vehicle for transporting my belongings, they arranged a separate car for me to ride in, which made the move very smooth. I had never used such a service before, but given how courteous it was, I would consider using it again. As I was about to get into the car, Susan followed me and looked surprised.
What? What's with this luxury car?
Hearing her scream-like voice, George hurriedly came out to the entrance.
What the heck? Hey, Emily, what is this? Explain.
Their faces red with anger. They looked anything but ordinary. They might be misunderstanding something. Since this might take a while, I asked the driver to wait. Then I turned back to the irrational two. What do you mean? I just called a car. It's obvious since I'm moving out and have luggage.
That's not what I mean. Why are you getting into such a luxury car? Where did you get the money? Don't tell me you stole it from us.
They barely give me any money. How would I steal it? I wish they'd be more realistic. Please don't say such terrible things. It's my own money. Encouraged by Jacob, I had been working as an online French tutor for about 10 years. Having majored in French in college, that background came in handy. I also did some interpreting and translation work, but the French classes were more successful than expected, and now I have my own company.
You earned it yourself? Don't be ridiculous. What kind of job can someone who doesn't leave the house have?
That's right. You must have stolen our money. You're always up to no good. Give it back now. Quickly.
Apparently, they couldn't quite grasp the concept of online work. They might be severely outdated, but perhaps that's to be expected. It's a field they'll never be involved with, so they never had the knowledge. Susan, jumping to conclusions and forcing her own sense of what's normal, tried to grab at me. George, his face red with anger, was yelling and seemed on the verge of stomping his feet in a tantrum. It would only be a matter of time before he joined Susan in physically confronting me. As the hired car driver looked on bewildered, Jacob got out of the back seat and raised his voice.
What my mom is saying is true. I introduced her to a job that turned out to be a great success, and now she's even wealthier than Dad. As her son, I'm really proud.
Susan was surprised by Jacob's unexpected appearance. She stopped grabbing at me and turned towards Jacob.
Jacob, what do you mean? You're not just siding with this woman because she's your mother, are you?
George seemed unconvinced and decided that Jacob must be lying.
Don't lie, Jacob. You're just under Emily's bad influence. Get back inside the house right now.
Jacob showed no signs of being intimidated. As his parent, it's impressive how well he's grown up.
No, I won't be going inside. I'm not returning to that house. I'm leaving with Mom.
Jacob stated it clearly. Even after becoming an adult, Jacob had not been allowed to move out of our house. As Susan inadvertently revealed earlier, their intention was probably for him to take care of them in their old age. Jacob, who could have left whenever he wanted, had until now complied with Susan and George. He stayed in this oppressive house with me because he was worried about leaving me alone. But now, he no longer needs to. With me moving out, Jacob, who stayed in the house for my sake, can now be free.
What are you saying? After all we've done raising you, how can you say such a thing?
That's right, Jacob. Apologize.
The one who raised me is my mom. It definitely wasn't you two.
Until now, Jacob had been quiet, but he firmly counted. Perhaps it was an unexpected turn of events, as Susan's face turned pale.
How dare you say something so terrible?
You only went to college because of me. What an awful way to talk.
Jacob looked at George with a very cold gaze.
It's always about money with you, Dad. And actually, that money has been coming from Mom for a while now.
What did you say?
George turned his gaze to me. You always say, "Who do you think you're living off of?" So I figured you'd start saying it to Jacob too, and that just made me sick. When my job started to take off, I decided I'd pay for all of Jacob's education costs. You didn't even notice. I'm also covering the shortfall in living expenses with my earnings. He really doesn't seem to notice, so I can't help but sigh deeply. Jacob seemed just as dismayed, his face expressing utter disbelief.
From kindergarten through college, you really think it costs the same? You just transferred enough for living expenses and let Mom cover the rest. Really, I wish I wasn't related to you.
What kind of way is that to talk to me as your parents?
So far, Jacob had been calm, but now he glared at George with fiery eyes. And then he let out an incredibly low roar.
My only parent is my mom.
Jacob's sudden outburst startled George. He probably didn't expect to be challenged. Susan also seemed too frightened to speak. They're only bold when they think there will be no pushback. They can only attack those they perceive as weak. What petty and despicable people they are.
I only called you Dad and Grandma to keep Mom from being the target of your frustrations. You two are really just strangers to me. A man who scrimps on money for the house just to torment Mom, and a woman who sporadically dotes on me and then acts all martyred as if she's my mother.
George and Susan were silenced by Jacob's piercing gaze. This is the first time I, as his mother, have seen Jacob so angry.
Acting like a mother, but only when you feel like doting. I don't remember you ever really taking care of me. Being taken out by you has been a pain since I was little, because you just impose your opinions and convenience on me. I'm not some accessory for you to show off.
Susan, stared down by Jacob, let out a small scream. Susan would only take Jacob from me when she felt like it, and act like a good grandmother in public places. It's been this way since Jacob was little. She would say she's buying him toys and then give him a cheap balloon, getting angry if he didn't play with it.
Emily has been harassing me, taking away the toys I bought for Jacob.
And so, Susan would shout as if she were the victim. When Jacob was in high school, she would take him out to buy clothes, choosing ones that didn't suit his taste at all. And when he wouldn't wear them, she got angry at me.
And then you'd badmouth Mom right in front of me. To me, you've always been the bad guy making Mom cry since I was little. Take over the house, take care of us in our old age. I don't care about that stuff.
Jacob spoke dismissively, and Susan seemed about to say something. But as soon as Jacob glared at her, she shrank back. George then cautiously tried to counter, despite seeming afraid.
How can you be so ungrateful? I didn't raise you to be like this.
What? Ungrateful?
Jacob scoffed at George's words.
I don't owe you anything. In fact, when I was a child and fell ill, it was Mom who stayed by my side the entire time. That woman over there just came in, whimsically shoved an apple in my mouth, and then left satisfied without even checking my fever or caring about the hospital or medicine.
Susan, pointed out, shrank back and mumbled some excuse that I couldn't hear well. Jacob probably couldn't hear her either. She probably wasn't even forming coherent words. After all, she couldn't rebut because what Jacob said was the truth.
As for that man, has he ever cared about me even once? You don't know anything about me. You only interfered loudly with which college and department I should attend. That's it. You never cared about where I worked. Elementary school, middle school, high school, you only cared about my grades, and even then, only as a reason to scold Mom if I wasn't first. It was obvious you weren't really interested.
Anger was evident in Jacob's eyes. Faced with his gaze, George and Susan were trembling. They had only ever berated me, someone they thought wouldn't fight back. This might be the first time they faced open anger from someone like Jacob. They're reaping the consequences of their petty lives. Still, I don't want to see Jacob consumed by anger. I approached him and gently tapped his shoulder. Calm down a bit. My touch seemed to remind him of his better self. He took a deep breath and managed to control his heightened emotions. Well, that's the situation, so Jacob and I are leaving home together. He's even managing a French language school now, and we'll be fine, just the two of us. George glanced at the hired car I had called. He then realized that what Jacob and I were saying was true. Then his demeanor suddenly changed, and he approached me with a fawning smile.
Wait, can't you reconsider? I was wrong, divorce. That's no way.
What are you saying now? You already have a lover. Just be happy with that person. The one who was most shocked by my words was Susan.
A lover? What do you mean, George?
Caught off guard, George frantically looked back and forth between Susan and me. Then he started to make a desperate excuse.
No, it's not true. Emily's lying.
Are you really going to play dumb? We have plenty of evidence, like text messages and photos. You can't talk your way out of this.
Jacob presented the evidence he and the detective I hired had gathered. They were all neatly organized into photos. Of course, they were copies, so it was pointless for George to try to deny it now. I looked at the sweating George coldly. Your girlfriend, Mary, right? She's quite beautiful and young. I've also been in contact with her husband. Both he and I plan to file for damages, so good luck.
Damages?
George's face turned even paler. Seeing him turn from flushed to ghostly white gave me some satisfaction. Jacob, remaining calm, confronted the panicked George with the reality.
You disregarded Mom and went after a married woman. It's only natural, or did you not think at all?
Contempt was clear in Jacob's eyes. I was almost impressed. It was because I thought I couldn't despise George any more than I already did, yet he still managed to disappoint me further. Who could have predicted he'd manage to disappoint beyond all expectations? George, you've been living it up ever since I stopped asking for household expenses. You spend most of your salary as soon as you get it, don't you? The money you contribute to the household has been steadily decreasing. Did he really think I was frugally managing the household just because of his scoldings? His uncontrolled spending had eroded both his financial sense and his reason.
It's unbelievable that you didn't realize Mom was covering almost all the household expenses.
There's no money in the household account. Every month, I deposited the necessary amount, which then got used up.
George, what's going on? Damages. How much money is left?
Susan rushed over to George, demanding answers. The fact that the first thing Susan asked her cheating son George about was money was so fittingly shallow for her. Feeling cornered, George frowned uncomfortably and then roughly brushed off Susan's hand.
Shut up. It's fine. I have my retirement money, and it's not like there's nothing left.
Let's hope that's enough to cover the damages. I don't know how much is left in George's salary account, but judging by his lavish spending with Mary, it can't be much. My words seemed to perfectly capture George's anxiety. George, who had been cowering, now glared at me with eyes full of hatred. I exaggeratedly shrugged. Oh, scary. Even if you glare at me, you'll still have to pay the damages, and no extra money is going to appear. If he had managed his finances properly, this wouldn't be happening. If he hadn't cheated, the damages might have been more manageable. Actually, since you didn't give me the household money, I plan to add that amount to the damages, so get ready. I've kept thorough records since I started covering nearly all the household expenses. Once I started making a steady income, I consulted a lawyer about our household issues and prepared everything properly. Unlike George, who spent without thinking. When Susan realized George had no money, she immediately turned to us with a fawning smile. Unlike George's ingratiating behavior towards me, she approached Jacob with a wheedling tone.
Wait, Jacob. Are you really leaving? Are you going to abandon me? Please think of me and help me.
Her tearful and pathetic act was laughable. Despite hearing Jacob's words, how can she think he would help her? Doesn't she realize he probably hates her and doesn't harbor any positive feelings? Surely, She can do something so shameless because she believes the world revolves around her. It's an incredibly convenient way of thinking. It's nothing short of pathetic. Jacob glared at Susan with loathing.
You always got in the way whenever I tried to go to Mom, ever since I was in kindergarten.
Susan's expression froze. She seemed to be scrambling for an excuse, but Jacob didn't give her a chance to speak, continuing with cold eyes.
And you always said things like, Jacob, it's a shame your mom can't cook, or Jacob, you got sick because your mom can't clean. You always badmouth Mom to make me hate her.
Hearing Jacob's words brought back my own memories. Susan would always say these things loudly, making sure I could hear. I already thought she was an unpleasant person, but having her actions exposed by Jacob left her expression frozen. She never considered how her treatment of me and her pitying of Jacob would make us feel. She only cared about her own satisfaction. That's the kind of selfish person she is.
I'm not someone you need to take a pity on, and Mom is great at cooking and cleaning. She always worked hard. You made Mom do even your own housework while you did nothing. If you say I abandoned you, I did it the moment you started bad-mouthing Mom to me.
Hearing Jacob's clear declaration of disdain, Susan collapsed to the ground. George, who had always catered to Susan, was still muttering about his money. In the end, self-centered people like them can only see their own needs. Jacob and I got into the hired car, leaving them behind. That's how it is, so make sure you pay the damages, and don't ever contact us again. There was no response from them. As the car drove away, I didn't look back even once, leaving behind the place where I had endured so many years of suffering. George was also sued for damages by Mary's husband, losing a substantial amount of money. I received the damages from Mary as well, which was a relief. I heard that Mary also got divorced. Unlike us, they didn't have children, which is a small mercy. I've also heard that Susan's health deteriorated after that incident. She hardly goes out anymore and is mostly bedridden during the day. Originally someone who loved to assert dominance over others, she now forces herself to go out on her good days, only to badmouth Jacob and me. People around her have become fed up and are gradually distancing themselves. Recently, even George has become fed up with dealing with her, which indicates just how bad things have gotten. Eventually, she'll have no one left to complain to. I hope she spends her remaining years in solitude. George and Mary worked at the same company, and both are now dealing with significant social stigma. When Mary found out George had no money, she quickly left him and also quit her job to work elsewhere. Without savings, George will have to continue working, feeling out of place for the rest of his life. Susan, his only remaining family, constantly complains, and as an old man with no money, George will likely find that no one wants to associate with him. He, too, is destined for a lonely life. I'm looking forward to seeing which of us ends up in a worse situation. I moved into an apartment with Jacob. I considered buying a house, but since Jacob would soon be on his own, an apartment seemed more convenient.
Mom, there's someone I want you to meet.
Well, does that mean? 6 months after the divorce, Jacob introduced me to his girlfriend.
Let me introduce you. This is Jessica.
Nice to meet you. I'm so glad to finally meet you. I hope we can get along well.
Jessica was a very kind and lovely girl.
Mom, you've been through a lot, So I want you to be as happy as possible from now on.
I'm so glad you're such a kind person. I'm a bit clumsy, but I really respect you, Emily. Please teach me many things.
With tears in my eyes, I nodded at their words. It felt like all the hardships I endured were being replaced by happiness. I'm sure that from now on, my life will be filled with smiles.